of Hispanic for la Opera in Los Angeles. We are very excited today because we're going to be introducing you the Placio Domingo Award 2014 recipient, Mr. Lee Holdridge. Mr. Lee Holdridge, how are you?
I'm fine today. How are you, Patricia?
I'm excited to be here and honored to you about your life.
It's my honor. Es mi honor.
As we say. I know you were born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and that you lived in Costa Rica.
Right. I also lived in Guatemala too. We lived there for 2 years before we lived in Costa Rica.
Oh, so good in the Spanish world.
Well, my father was a scientist and he was very devoted to tropical forestry and studying ecology. So naturally, he was living in Latin America. He met my mother in Puerto Rico, and then he was assigned to Haiti for a while, which is of course where I was born. Then there was a revolution in Haiti, so we had to leave. They always have revolutions.
That's true.
And came back to the States for a little while, and then he was assigned to Guatemala, and we went there. And those are my first memories of Latin America, remembering Guatemala, growing up there and living in the country. We had they did a lot of work on the forestry. And then we moved to Costa Rica because the research was moved to Costa Rica. And that's really where I pretty much spent my childhood growing up there.
Were you speaking Spanish or English when you were growing up?
We spoke both. We had a bilingual household. And we even switched in the middle of the sentence sometimes, because you could make a point that one word was better than the other.
I understand.
So anybody outside or listening to our family talk would get confused. But so language was a natural. Both the English and Spanish were totally natural to us as children.
And in Spanish.
Yes, I was sent to schools in Costa Rica that were bilingual anyway. So because they put a premium on learning English with their future college and so forth like that. So a lot of the Costa Rican kids that wanted to go on further all learned English at an early age.
That's very good.
Yeah.
I mean, I was imagining how he came with the English, living his childhood, because obviously they don't have any accent like me. Question.
Yes.
How did you start with music?
Well, it's interesting because at first I was very interested in all sorts of things. Science, of course, I was interested in astronomy and all those things. But my mother played the guitar a little bit, and so I could hear music. And then a number of the scientists that worked with my father were also musicians, and they played music, and I heard music constantly. So I got more and more. When I was 10, I decided I wanted to study violin. So I went to see the local conductor of the orchestra in San Jose. He was giving violin lessons, and I convinced my parents to set me up for violin lessons, and that's how I started. No, I pushed my parents.
Okay, now we know the truth.
Then, by the time I was 12, I was already composing. I would rewrite my violin exercises.
So
And my teacher would say to me, he said, "Why do you do that?" And I said, "Because they're boring." So he's the one that said to me, he said, "I think you want to be a composer, not a violinist." And that started the whole wheels turning.
So would you say that at age 12 was that moment that defines you as a musician?
Well, I think at that moment was when I decided that composition was really what I wanted to do. And composing every chance I could. By the time I was 15, I talked my parents into sending me during the school year to live with an uncle and aunt who lived in Boston. And I would go to high school in Boston and I would take private music lessons. And in summers I would come home to Costa Rica. And that started the whole thing. I was composing. I had quite a number of orchestral works composed, some works for piano, some works for a lot of works for violin and string orchestra. And my first inclinations of opera was starting to listen to World War II.
At 15.
Well, from 15 to 19, yeah, through that whole period. So,
Young people, going away from opera at that age.
no, I was attracted to the voice. I was always attracted to the voice. We'll talk later, but when I started seeing 20th century opera in New York, I did not like what I heard. So I said, we have to do something about this. We have to change it.
So your mother played the guitar. Was she playing local music or also classical music?
No, she knew a little bit of some Puerto Rican folk songs. She was very shy about it, but I caught her playing once in a while. But she was very true as a Latina. She would not have it, very quiet to herself, very much to herself. It's in later years that I found out everything about her, because as you get older, you say, hey, Mom, and finally she would begin to talk. But, when we were kids growing up, she told us very little.
Did you ever like salsa?
Oh, yeah, I loved all kinds of, as a kid, we heard constantly, I heard Cuban music, which was fantastic, Puerto Rican music, which is all kind of similar in the Caribbean style. I remember going to Panama and hearing some great, that was the first Brazilian music I heard, early Brazilian music. So it was a melting pot of a lot of different, a lot of classical music. Costa Rica had a full symphony orchestra, and my violin teacher was also the conductor of the orchestra, so that I would attend rehearsals and I would attend concerts, and I heard him doing these great works and all these different works.
We know that you're very versatile as you have composed a range for different genres, like Barbra Streisand and Whitney Houston.
About Plácido Domingo.
Oh, Plácido Domingo, Maestro, of course.
El Jefe.
But what a range, of different styles.
It's kind of like, it's my nature to be sort of a renaissance. I was always interested. I didn't like having divisions between music. And when I was studying in Boston, and when I first came to New York, everybody tried to put barriers. Well, you can only do this, but you can only do this. And I kept saying, well, why? I like all this stuff. Why can't I do all these different things? So I just did it. And I think that's now more musicians think.
When you came to America again, let's say Boston, were you received as an American or as a Hispanic? Probably so.
You know what? I don't really remember exactly. Kids, you're just another kid, what I mean? You know what I'm saying? And Boston, there were not a lot of Latin Americans in Boston at that time. When I got to New York, I started to, of course you were exposed to a lot of the Puerto Ricans and everybody. But it's really when I got to the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, that I really was much more aware of the different cultures. And it brought me back to my roots. I connected more. I'd be walking down the street and I'd hear someone actually, you're from Costa Rica, and say, how'd you know? I said, I know the accent.
You came to LA as a kid, so...
Right. I was doing arrangements for him, and I had started a career in New York, and I was doing a lot of work there, but then I started to get a lot of work here, and I was going back and forth. I finally said, okay, that's it, I'm moving here.
You like California?
Well, and I was interested in the film, getting into film, and so forth.
Of course, that's great. Would you say that these times are very difficult for young composers?
Yes, because there are so many doing it, and it's not like there's a lot of work for everybody, so it's a tough time. And it's a tough time in general because everybody wants to cut the education of the arts, everybody wants to cut everything, and it's a very difficult time. And somehow we have to work against that and change that mentality, because the arts are where the soul comes from, the soul of the people comes from. Everything else is
struggling to get one of his compositions or to get recognized or to be channeled, where shall he start?
Hence, I think nowadays, the education, what university, where you are, if they have an orchestra that perform works, it makes a huge difference. I think what you have to do more than anything as a student is you have to hear what it sounds like. You have to have musicians play it. You have to hear it. Learn so much. And you find out, oh, they can't play that. That doesn't sound too good when they play that. So I think somehow it starts with the education. It starts with the opportunity to be in situations where they can either play or have music played or sung or whatever it is. And if they can't be in a school where they can do some other situation that provides that for them, it's the only way, it's the only avenue. And I think there are a lot of people that get an electronic keyboard and they think they're composers.
Right.
Well, it doesn't work that way because composition has a lot of craft involved in it. And if you study that craft, and studies, if you learn that craft, you know how to build on it. And it's like somebody deciding, they buy some paper and plan and say, okay, I'm going to be an architect. Well, it's not that simple. You know everything about structure, balance, all these things, same thing in music. You've got to know the background.
Is there such a program or there is anything protege program, like I can take you under my wing and make sure that your music is heard?
I don't think so, no. I mean, there are foundations around the country, that try to commission works, but it seems like they're not doing as much as they used to. It seems to be limited. Why that is, it's a difficult question to answer. I don't know the answer for it. I've been very fortunate. Everything I've written, I've played, so.
And believe me, we are fortunate to have you too, because you're brilliant.
Well, I'm just doing what I do.
Thank you. Who are your heroes?
Winston Churchill is one of my heroes. Ludwig van Beethoven is another hero. I have a lot of heroes because the truth of the matter is, not when I say Winston Churchill, not only because of his the fact that he struggled against tremendous odds, and he made mistakes, and he made mistakes, and he came back and was able to. I see him as a very iconic figure of the 20th century, what he did with history. I love his books. I love reading him. Beethoven had such a difficult life, and yet he still was inspired and creative. So you look at people like that, and down through the ages, there's many people down through the ages that you look at, and the thing that most gets you is the people that some difficulties did what they did. And sometimes, you look in some cases like Bach, they didn't consider him a great composer. They thought, well, he's a really good organist. His pieces are kind of interesting, but, it's okay. And it wasn't until much later, long after his death, that somebody started to say. So you just never know, and I think it's the whole thing about surmounting odds. And actually, that's a very human thing. It's not just music. It's in all people. It's in all humanity. The thing that always gets to me is people that overcome. How they hang in there. They do it. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. I have great admiration for that.
When you say that you don't know how they do it, I am also curious to know how you do it when you are going to, let's say, compose a new piece and you are confronted with this blank. Where do you start? How do you hear the music? In your head first and then you start writing?
Well, I hear it in my head a lot. I have ideas all the time. Constantly have ideas. I can sit down at a piano and start making things up, easy. It's very easy for me. Now, when you work on a film, you have the advantage. The film is usually almost complete, so you look, and it's affecting you. how the images, how the story, how the characters affect you, you begin to react to that, and you come back at it with the music and say, maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. But when you're writing a piece, just say for the concert hall, you're just looking at the blank page and say, well, now what are we going to do? And that's just, you have to start to maybe, in your head, maybe ideas, something swirls around, so you go to the piano and say, let's try this. So sometimes just driving around here in LA, you're driving around and suddenly an idea pops in your head.
Going back to your mother.
Yes.
Me about all these ideas. Because she played the guitar, now it's in my head.
Yeah.
And she was very Latina.
Right.
When you are going to compose music, that's anywhere there comes those tunes, that melody that influence you in any way?
Oh yes, especially there have been projects that I've worked on. I did a movie once, a television movie that was set in Puerto Rico. So of course I went back. I got a guy who played the quattro, which is the Puerto Rican guitar, which has a beautiful sound. And I'm very aware. There's different music in different regions, and the harmonic structure is different, and the melodic structure is different. And even say a country like Mexico, the music within Mexico is different in different areas. And you hear those differences if you listen to them. An example, when I worked on Holdridge, the Gringo Viejo, I wanted to do Mexican music, but everybody thinks Mexican music is, because historically it was the music of the bandas of that period. And it's a different kind of music than what we hear like in restaurants, and people say, oh, mariachi music. I say, that's one aspect of Mexican music. There are other aspects. And the banda music is very interesting from a historic standpoint, because during the time when the French ruled Mexico, they had martial bands all over the place. So everybody learned to play brass instruments. So when the imperialism went away, there were all these people playing trumpets and tubas. And that was very much a part of Mexican music at the turn of the century, of the previous century. And I wanted to capture that feeling in El Gringo. So if you watch this movie and you hear the score, you'll hear more of the banda music in it, and then you hear my orchestral, and the harmonic language I use, and what when you think of Mexican music. It's very important to make these distinctions, and so when you grow up in a part of the world, you become aware of that, and having the musical background, you begin to say, oh, they like that harmonic progression, but over here they don't use it. They use a different one. When you start this creep into the scores. And Dulce Rosa, very specifically, did not want anything Mexican or Central American. I went to South America, because that's where it takes place. It's a completely different language. And I wanted it to be more of a classical, more of a symphonic language, rather than a folk. Purposely did not do folk music in it. But in a very subtle way, in the harmonic structure, there's a bit of the South American language in it. But that's how I work inside my head. I don't expect the audience to sit there and say, oh, that's, I just want them to enjoy it and like it. But I think that what that does is give it a voice, so to speak.
Wow, Mr. Holdridge.
Call me Mr. Holdridge was my father.
Okay.
Era mi papá.
Very well.
Sabe que era Dr. Holdridge, porque era científico. He was a scientist, so he was Dr. Holdridge. And many times people would come and say, look, I have a... And he'd say, oh, I'm not that kind of a doctor. I'm a science doctor.
For Latinos, when you say doctor...
They immediately, but now, of course, it's different now. But at the time, it was very much, the word doctor was Holdridge.
I really enjoyed listening to you.
Well, thank you.
We are very honored to have you and appreciate your effort.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and keep tuned because we have more interviews to come.